The first thing my father noticed wasn't the bronze star pinned to my uniform. It was the mud on my boots. He glanced down, frowned for half a second, then waved toward the side entrance of the Prescott estate like I was a delivery driver who had shown up 5 minutes late. Try not to track that across the marble. That was my welcome home after 14 months away. I shifted my weathered canvas duffel higher on my shoulder and stepped inside anyway. The house looked even larger than I remembered, although maybe it only felt that way because I'd spent the last year sleeping in spaces barely wide enough to stretch my legs. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished floors. Fresh white orchids lined every hallway. Somewhere deeper inside, a string quartet was playing songs no one was actually listening to. Everyone was busy looking at Madeline. My younger sister stood in the middle of the ballroom, wearing a silk rehearsal dress that probably cost more than my pickup truck. 3 photographers circled her while she laughed for their cameras, stopping every few seconds to adjust the diamond bracelet on her wrist. Cass. She hugged me just long enough for someone to snap a picture. Oh, careful with the uniform, she said as she stepped back. The makeup artists have been working all day. I smiled. Good to see you too. It really is, she answered. By the way, could you stay after dinner? We still have seating charts to organize. I had been in the house less than 3 minutes. Already I had a job. The guests gathered near the grand staircase as my father climbed onto a small platform with a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Winston Prescott announced, grinning like he'd just negotiated world peace. Nothing makes a father happier than giving his daughter everything she deserves. Applause filled the room. Then 2 assistants rolled out an oversized ceremonial check, $100,000, payable to Madeline Prescott. Purpose, wedding celebration. My father handed it to her while cameras flashed nonstop. This covers the custom Paris gown, he said proudly, and the ice sculptures. Your mother insisted we shouldn't settle for only one. Everyone laughed. Someone joked that even the sculptures probably had better health insurance than most Americans. Even I laughed. It was actually funny. For about 3 seconds. Because while everyone admired 6 figures printed on decorative cardboard, I quietly did math in my head. The apartment near my newest assignment required a $5,000 security deposit before the end of the week. I had enough saved for moving expenses, but unexpected medical costs after my last deployment had eaten through more cash than I'd planned. I wasn't asking for charity, just a short loan. I waited until the crowd drifted toward the champagne bar before walking over. Dad, could I ask you something? He kept smiling for nearby guests. What is it? I need $5,000 for a housing deposit near my next base. I'll pay every penny back within 6 months. His smile disappeared. Not dramatically, just switched off, like someone flipping a light switch. He leaned closer so nobody else could hear. The government pays you to wear that uniform, Cassandra. I stayed quiet. We invest in family members who actually have a future in the real world. For a second, I honestly wondered if I'd misunderstood him. A future? You chose your career. I chose to serve. You chose government housing, military benefits, and deployments. That's your investment. This, he nodded toward Madeline across the room, is ours. I looked over at my sister. She was laughing with a wedding planner about imported flower walls. My father straightened his jacket. You'll figure something out. Then he walked away to greet another investor. No argument, no discussion. Meeting adjourned. I grabbed a glass of water instead of champagne, military habit. Besides, alcohol and uniforms rarely make smart partners. An older couple recognized my service ribbons and thanked me for serving. We talked about their grandson applying to West Point. It was probably the warmest conversation I'd had inside that house. Then my mother appeared. Cassandra. She wasn't smiling. There you are. She slid a heavy silver tray into my hands before I could answer. Dirty champagne flutes, lipstick stains, half-melted ice. Used cocktail napkins. The catering staff is overwhelmed, she said. Take these into the kitchen. I stared at the tray. Mom lowered her voice. Don't make this awkward. Around us stood Charleston's wealthiest families. Shipping executives, real estate developers, state politicians, country club board members. None of them questioned why the woman wearing a decorated Army service dress uniform was suddenly carrying dirty dishes. One guest actually thanked me. I appreciate attentive staff. I almost corrected him. Almost. Instead, I carried the tray toward the kitchen, because making a scene would only become another story about how difficult Cassandra always was. Inside the kitchen, one of the actual catering employees hurried over. Oh my goodness, she whispered. Ma'am, you don't have to do that. I smiled and handed her the tray. No worries. She looked embarrassed. I thought you were family. I am. Her expression changed in a way I'd seen before. People never know where to look after hearing something like that. As I turned to leave, I noticed an old brass key hanging from a hook beside the pantry entrance. Room 214. The tiny engraved tag stopped me cold. My childhood bedroom. I hadn't seen that key in years. Funny thing about old houses. They keep secrets longer than people do. I slipped the key into my pocket without really thinking about it. Maybe I just wanted to see my room one last time before returning to base. Maybe I wanted proof that some corner of this house still remembered I had once lived here. I didn't know then that opening that door would explain far more than my father's refusal to lend me $5,000. It would uncover the one decision my family believed I would never question, and the one mistake they never imagined I'd eventually be able to prove. I closed my fingers around the old brass key and headed upstairs before anyone could stop me. The staircase still creaked in the same places. I remembered which step to avoid because it always squealed loud enough for my dad to yell from his office when I snuck downstairs for leftover pie. Some memories survive even when people don't. Room 214 sat at the end of the hallway. I slid the key into the lock. It didn't fit. I frowned and tried again before noticing fresh scratches around the doorknob. The lock had been replaced. I knocked once out of habit. No answer. The door wasn't even latched. When I pushed it open, I honestly thought I had walked into the wrong room. The walls had been painted ivory instead of pale blue. Every bookshelf was gone. My old desk had disappeared. The twin bed my grandfather built when I was 12 had been replaced by rows of polished white cabinets stretching from floor to ceiling. Hundreds of shoes, designer heels, limited editions. Wedding shoes arranged under soft lighting like museum exhibits. A velvet ottoman stood where I used to study calculus. A mirrored island displayed matching handbags. A handwritten sign read, Madeline Bridal Collection. I actually laughed, not because it was funny. Because sometimes your brain refuses to believe what your eyes are telling it. So you found it. Madeline's voice came from behind me. I turned around. She leaned against the hallway wall, holding a champagne flute. What happened to my room? She blinked, like I'd asked where the silverware was kept. You've been gone forever. I've been deployed. Same difference. She stepped inside and admired the shelves. I needed more storage. For shoes? For the wedding. I looked around again. My room became your closet. She shrugged. Mom said you weren't using it. I wanted to ask 100 questions. Instead, I asked one. Where's my stuff? Oh. She pointed toward the balcony. I think they boxed everything. I walked past her without another word. The balcony door stuck for a second before sliding open. Rain had blown across the concrete earlier, leaving everything damp. 3 large black contractor bags sat against the railing. One had split open. Year-old notebooks. A softball glove. My debate team plaque. I knelt down and carefully pulled things out one at a time. The cardboard backing of my high school valedictorian certificate had warped from the moisture. My West Point acceptance packet was folded nearly in half. The envelope still carried the official seal. Congratulations, Cassandra Prescott. The rest blurred because water had soaked through the ink. I remembered exactly where I was when that letter arrived. I'd finished a breakfast shift at Harbor Grill Diner and still smelled like bacon grease when the mail carrier handed it to me. Mrs. Elena Brooks, the diner owner, hugged me so hard she almost knocked my visor off. You earned this, she'd said. Not my parents, Mrs. Brooks. She had celebrated me more than my own family ever did. I found another notebook. My handwriting covered every page. Training goals, scholarship deadlines, little reminders to myself. Don't quit just because nobody claps. I smiled at that one. Apparently 18-year-old me already understood something 33-year-old me occasionally forgot. Behind me, Madeline sighed. Are you seriously going through all that junk? I didn't answer. She checked her phone instead. The florist needs final approval. I kept sorting. One trash bag held every trophy I'd ever won. Academic decathlon. Tracks, student leadership. None of them broken. Just thrown away. That somehow felt worse. Someone hadn't destroyed them in anger. They simply decided they weren't worth keeping. I carried a stack of papers back inside and set them on what used to be my desk location. Except there was no desk. Only custom shelving filled with imported Italian heels. Funny priorities. As I turned toward the built-in cabinets, I noticed something familiar. One drawer hadn't been replaced. It was original. Probably overlooked during the renovation because it blended into the new cabinetry. I pulled it open. Empty. Except for one envelope pushed all the way into the back corner. Charleston Community Bank. Joint savings statement. My name. My father's name. I hadn't seen that account in years. I opened the statement. Beginning balance. $48,312.76. I remembered every extra shift behind that number. Every weekend I skipped. Every double shift pouring coffee before school and washing dishes after closing. Every birthday where I asked people to give me grocery gift cards instead of presents because I wanted every paycheck to stay in that account. Transaction history. Withdrawal. Withdrawal. The final page stopped me cold. Cashier's check. Issued. Payee. Southern Petal Signature Events. Memo line. Custom floral wedding registry. Madeline Prescott. Amount $48,312.70. Ending balance. 0. Not low. Not reduced. Gone. Every dollar. I checked the date. The withdrawal happened 8 months after I reported for active duty overseas. No phone call, no email, no permission, just signatures. One of them belonged to my father. I stared at the page for a long time. Not because I couldn't understand it. Because I understood it perfectly. He hadn't refused to help me with $5,000 tonight because he couldn't afford it. He had already spent nearly $50,000 that belonged to me. Behind me, my mother stepped quietly into the room. "There you are," she said. I folded the statements. Then again. She noticed the envelope immediately. "Oh, that single word told me everything. You knew. Cassandra, you knew." She crossed her arms. "It wasn't as simple as you're making it." "Then make it simple. Your sister's wedding had commitments, vendors, deposits. We intended to replace the money. When?" She didn't answer. "When? We assumed you wouldn't need it." I let out one short laugh. "I was in another country. You had military benefits. I had plans." She looked uncomfortable for the first time all night. "You always managed on your own." There it was. The family policy. If Cassandra survives, Cassandra doesn't need anything. I folded the statement one last time and slipped it into the inside pocket of my uniform jacket. My mother reached toward me. "Don't ruin your sister's wedding over an old misunderstanding." I looked at her hand until she lowered it. "This isn't about the wedding." "What is it about?" I met her eyes. For the first time tonight, I know exactly how much my place in this family was worth. Neither of us spoke again. I walked out of that room carrying nothing except a bank statement, a water-damaged acceptance letter, and a truth that suddenly explained far more than either of them realized. I tucked the bank statement deeper inside my uniform jacket and caught the first flight back to my duty station, without saying goodbye to anyone. That turned out to be easier than I expected. Nobody called to ask whether I made it back safely. Nobody texted to apologize. By the time my transport aircraft lifted off for my next deployment, Charleston already felt less like home and more like a place where my last name happened to match everyone else's. Our unit supported tactical logistics across multiple forward operating locations. Most people picture soldiers kicking down doors. My job was different. If fuel didn't arrive, helicopters stayed on the ground. If encrypted communications failed, medical evacuation requests got delayed. If supply routes broke down, people paid for those mistakes with blood instead of paperwork. The work wasn't glamorous, it was relentless. Some nights I spent 10 straight hours inside a command shelter, staring at network traffic and convoy reports. Other days I helped unload pallets until my shoulders felt like concrete. Every assignment came with another checklist, another deadline, another reminder that somebody else's life depended on strangers doing their jobs correctly. I liked that. The Army didn't care whether I came from money. It didn't care who my father was. It cared whether I showed up prepared, whether I finished what I started, whether the soldier standing next to me could trust me. That was a simpler system than family. Every birthday came and went with remarkable consistency. Nothing arrived from Charleston. No cards, no phone calls, no emails asking how I was doing. One year, a private from Nebraska somehow found out it was my birthday because the dining facility manager mentioned it during breakfast. That evening, 6 soldiers I'd known for less than 4 months surprised me with a chocolate cake that leaned slightly to one side because someone had baked it in a field kitchen. They sang loudly, completely off-key. One of them stuck a plastic spoon into the frosting because nobody could find birthday candles. I laughed harder than I had in months. The cake tasted terrible. It remains one of the best birthdays I've ever had. Family isn't always the people who share your last name. Sometimes it's the people who notice you're eating dinner alone. I stopped expecting anything from home after that. It wasn't anger anymore. Anger takes energy. This was quieter, safer. I folded the disappointment into a small corner of my life and left it there, only taking it out when I couldn't avoid it. The only person I still worried about was my grandfather, Garrick. He had never treated me like I needed to earn my place at the table. When I was 16, he taught me how to change brake pads, because he said every adult should know at least one skill that saved money. When I entered West Point, he mailed me a handwritten letter instead of sending a text. Real paper, real ink. He ended it with one sentence I still carried in my wallet. Character is what remains after applause leaves the room. A year into my deployment, my mother called. The connection crackled so badly I almost couldn't recognize her voice. "Cassandra, your grandfather's heart condition has gotten worse." My stomach tightened. What happened? He needs specialized treatment. Is he okay? We're doing everything we can. I asked if I could speak with him. He's sleeping. That answer came too quickly. We'll tell him you called. The line disconnected less than a minute later. Later that night, I logged into my military banking portal. Combat deployments came with additional hazardous duty pay. I changed my automatic transfer. 50% of every extra payment would go directly to a joint family account my parents managed. In the transfer notes, I wrote exactly the same thing every month. For Grandpa Garrick's cardiac treatment, no exceptions, no delays. Some months the amount was $2,184.50. Other months it was $2,731.40 depending on operational pay adjustments. I kept digital copies of every confirmation number because that's what military training teaches you. Document everything, verify everything. Trust records more than memory. Whenever I asked how Grandpa was doing, my mother always had an answer. Physical therapy helped. The cardiologist adjusted his medication. He has another appointment next month. It sounded believable. Specific enough to stop further questions. I believed every word. 5 years passed faster than anyone back home probably imagined. Promotions came. New responsibilities followed. The captain's bars on my uniform carried more weight than the lieutenant's I'd started with. The job became harder. So did saying goodbye to soldiers rotating out of the unit. You build friendships quickly when everyone understands tomorrow isn't guaranteed. One afternoon, while waiting for a secure software update to finish installing, I picked up my phone during lunch. One notification caught my eye. Madeline had posted a public video. I almost scrolled past it. Curiosity won. The camera swept across an enormous waterfront house overlooking a marina outside Atlanta, floor-to-ceiling windows, a private dock, an infinity pool stretching toward the river. She walked through the front door wearing oversized sunglasses even though she was indoors. Manifesting really works, she laughed into the camera. Sterling appeared beside her holding 2 champagne glasses. They kissed while someone off-camera applauded. Madeline turned back toward the lens. We're so grateful for generational wealth and a family that always believes in investing in success. The comments exploded with heart emojis and congratulations. Goals. So inspiring. Old money elegance. I watched the video twice, then a third time. Something kept bothering me. Not the house, not the cars parked outside, the dining room. On the far wall hung an antique grandfather clock. Dark walnut, hand-carved eagle at the top. A tiny scratch beneath the pendulum door. I knew that clock. I'd made that scratch myself when I was 9 after crashing a toy wagon into it. It had stood for decades in Grandpa Garrick's library. He once told me it would never leave that house while he was alive. Yet there it was, inside Madeline's new mansion. I stared at the pause screen until my lunch break ended. Maybe Grandpa had decided to give it to her. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe. Still, before I slipped my phone back into my pocket, I opened my banking app and looked once more at the latest transfer confirmation for his medical care. Everything appeared exactly as it should. Every payment had cleared. Every record matched. On paper, nothing was wrong. For the first time in 5 years, I found myself wondering whether paper could lie just as easily as people. I locked my phone, pushed away from the break room table, and went back to work. But that grandfather clock stayed in the back of my mind long after the screen went dark. By the time I rotated back to the United States, 5 years had passed. The promotion to captain came with more responsibility, a different assignment, and an office inside one of the Army's secure network operation centers. Most people imagined rooms full of blinking lights and dramatic countdowns. The reality looked a lot less exciting. Rows of workstations, restricted access doors, coffee that could probably remove rust from steel, and enough cybersecurity protocols to make every login feel like applying for a passport. I liked it. Everything either matched the records or it didn't. Computers rarely cared about family feelings. On my second Monday back, I was reviewing encrypted traffic logs when my personal phone buzzed. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again. During lunch, I finally turned the screen over. Mom, Dad, Madeline, voicemail, missed call, missed call, missed call. By 6:40 that evening, the number reached 88. 88 missed calls. 5 years of silence. Now they suddenly couldn't stop dialing. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I listened to the voicemail previews. Cassandra, please call us. We need to talk. It's urgent. There has been a misunderstanding. Madeline even cried in one message. Real tears or influencer tears. I couldn't tell. Neither mattered. People who truly miss you usually don't wait half a decade to prove it. I drove back to my apartment, heated leftover chicken and rice, fed my old rescue dog Ranger, and placed my phone face down on the kitchen counter. The calls continued. At 9:17 p.m., my father finally sent a text. Call me immediately. This concerns the family. Not, how are you? Welcome home. I'm proud of you. Just business. I stared at the message for a while before deleting it. Military life teaches you something valuable. Urgency isn't measured by who is shouting the loudest. It's measured by evidence. The next morning, I requested personal leave for the afternoon, citing private legal matters. Once approved, I drove to a small office I occasionally rented for consulting work. The location had no connection to military systems, no classified networks, and no government equipment. That distinction mattered. I wasn't about to blur professional boundaries. Everything I touched that afternoon came from publicly available corporate filings, commercial databases, archived financial disclosures, and records I was legally authorized to review because my name appeared on multiple historical family business documents. Cyber investigations don't begin with hacking. They begin with paperwork. People watch movies and imagine someone smashing a keyboard until secret files magically appear. Actual forensic work is slower. You compare dates, names, corporate registration, digital signatures, insurance filings, property transfers, tax liens. One document rarely tells the story. 100 documents usually do. I started with Prescott Shipping and Timber, annual reports, executive appointments, board resolutions, nothing unusual. Then I searched Sterling Sinclair, Chief Financial Officer, appointed 3 years earlier. Interesting. His previous investment firm had quietly dissolved after several commercial real estate projects failed. Not illegal, just expensive. I kept digging. County property records showed several luxury purchases that didn't seem to match his reported compensation. Again, not proof, just another loose thread. By early evening, the threads began connecting. One pension management report contained revised contribution totals. Another filing listed delayed distributions. A third document referenced an internal accounting adjustment that somehow repeated every quarter. The numbers looked rehearsed, too clean, too symmetrical. I exported everything into a comparison worksheet. The differences added up faster than I expected. 183,006, then another variance. 240,006 and 6, another. When I totaled every discrepancy across multiple reporting periods, the amount stopped at exactly $3,487.18. More than $2.2 million. Employee pension funds. Money belonging to people who had spent decades loading cargo, maintaining equipment, and keeping my father's company alive. My stomach tightened. I checked every formula twice, then manually. The number didn't change. Someone had been quietly moving retirement money through shell transactions disguised as temporary operating adjustments. I leaned back and rubbed my eyes. This wasn't careless bookkeeping, it was systematic. Whoever designed it expected nobody to compare every filing side by side. Most people never would. I almost stopped there. Almost. Then I searched my own name. At first, only old records appeared. Military commendations, property tax history, vehicle registration. Then one commercial loan filing caught my attention. Borrower guarantee. I clicked it open. My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. Years in uniform teach you to get calmer when things become serious. Loan amount, $2,500,000. Commercial waterfront redevelopment. Personal guarantor, Captain Cassandra Prescott. I frowned. That couldn't be right. I opened the attached signature page. There it was. It's my signature. Or something pretending to be it. Close enough to fool someone who had never seen me sign a military document. Not close enough to fool me. The loops were wrong. The pressure points were wrong. The final stroke always curved upward when I signed. This one didn't. A scanned notary certificate followed. Then another. Every page looked official. Every page was fake. The approval date hit me even harder. I had been deployed overseas that entire month. According to Army travel records, I was nearly 7,000 miles away conducting operational support exercises. I couldn't possibly have appeared before an American notary, which meant someone had counted on exactly one fact. Active duty personnel stationed overseas are difficult for outside auditors to contact quickly. If questions arose, delays bought time. Time to move money. Time to hide records. Time to finish the fraud before anyone compared signatures. My phone vibrated again. Dad, ignored. Another call. Mom, ignored. Then Sterling. His name appeared on the screen for the very first time. I let it ring until voicemail answered. A few seconds later, a text arrived. We have a business situation that requires your immediate cooperation. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I read it twice. Then I looked back at the forged loan documents still open on my monitor. For 5 years, I thought I'd been sending money to keep my grandfather alive. Now I was staring at proof that someone had already decided my name was just another company asset they could spend whenever they needed one. They weren't calling because they missed their daughter. They were calling because they had finally reached the point where my signature was worth more to them than my silence. I set my phone on silent, printed every document I'd collected, and accepted my father's invitation to meet only after choosing the time myself. If they wanted my signature, they were going to wait for it. The Prescott estate looked exactly the same from the outside. The hedges were trimmed within an inch of perfection. 2 new luxury SUVs sat in the circular driveway, each polished until they reflected the front columns like mirrors. Inside, nobody offered coffee. Nobody asked how I was adjusting after coming home. Nobody mentioned 5 years of deployments. My father simply nodded toward his private study. "Let's keep this between family." That sentence had always meant the opposite. The study smelled of leather-bound books and cedar. The walls were lined with framed photographs of shipping vessels, business awards, and charity galas. There wasn't a single picture of me in uniform. Sterling was already sitting at the conference table. His suit probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He smiled like we were about to negotiate a real estate purchase instead of my future. "Cassandra," he said, "good to finally have you back." I pulled out a chair. "Let's save the small talk." My father closed the door behind him. The click of the lock echoed louder than it should have. Without another word, he placed a thick folder on the polished desk and pushed it toward me. "Read this." I opened the first page, Retroactive Debt Indemnity and Asset Liability Waiver. 36 pages. Prepared by a corporate law firm. The language was dense enough to discourage anyone from reading carefully, but years of reviewing operational orders had trained my eyes to spot what mattered. Page 7. Personal Assumption of Commercial Liabilities. Page 12. Acceptance of all existing and future claims associated with designated financial obligations. Page 23. Waiver of legal challenges. Binding arbitration. I looked up. "You want me to absorb the debt. It's temporary," my father replied. "Temporary usually comes with an end date." Sterling folded his hands. "We're restructuring." "No." He blinked. "No, you're hiding liability." His smile faded. "You've always been dramatic. I've always read contracts." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Sterling leaned forward. "I think you misunderstand the situation." "I don't. You haven't finished reading." "I've already finished." He exchanged a quick glance with my father. Neither of them looked surprised, almost as if they expected resistance. Sterling rested both elbows on the table. "Fine." His tone changed. The friendly executive disappeared. "You've already seen the loan, haven't you?" I didn't answer. "I'll take that as yes." My father sighed impatiently. "This company supports hundreds of families. One accounting problem shouldn't destroy everything we've built." "One accounting problem?" "The wording isn't important." "The wording is exactly what's important." Sterling tapped the folder. "Sign this and everything disappears." "No." He laughed once. Not because he found me funny. Because he thought I didn't understand leverage. "Cassandra, you're looking at this emotionally." "I'm looking at forged documents." "Technicalities." I actually smiled. Calling federal fraud a technicality was bold. Stupid, but bold. Sterling opened his briefcase and removed another folder. "This is the alternative." He slid several printed pages across the desk. At first glance, they looked official. Army letterhead, ethics review format, ethics complaint summary. The allegations were absurd: misuse of government resources, undisclosed financial conflicts, improper handling of classified systems. Every accusation was fabricated. Still, they looked convincing enough that an investigator would have to examine them. Sterling watched me read. "If this package reaches your command, they'll open an inquiry. They'll also discover it's false. Eventually." He let that word hang. "Investigations take time." He smiled again. "Promotions stop. Security clearances get reviewed. Assignments disappear. And if the timing works out just right," he leaned closer. "Court-martial." My father didn't interrupt him, didn't object, didn't tell him to stop threatening his own daughter. He simply sat there with both hands folded, waiting for me to surrender. Sterling continued. "Dishonorable discharge." I looked directly at him. "You've never served." "No. So don't pretend you understand what those words mean. They mean leverage. They mean nothing if they're built on lies." He shrugged. "Lies can be surprisingly expensive to disprove." I almost laughed. Instead, I noticed something else. His right leg hadn't stopped bouncing since I walked in. Confident people don't usually shake like that. "What happened here is unbelievable," I said quietly. And the more I listened, the more it reminded me of another family disaster I've talked about before. One where a polished image covered years of deception until everything collapsed overnight. If you're watching between minutes 45 and 55, keep an eye on the story waiting in the top right corner. Sometimes the second truth is even harder to believe than the first. Neither of them understood why I smiled after saying that. They assumed I was cracking under pressure. The truth was simpler. People who panic stop observing. I never stopped observing. Sterling reached into his inside jacket pocket. He removed a heavy gold fountain pen. Expensive. Personalized. His initials engraved near the clip. He placed it carefully on top of the contract and pushed it toward me. The pen stopped exactly 6 inches from my hand. Then he lowered his voice. A low-ranking administrative clerk has no standing against our family's reputation. I looked at him without blinking. Administrative clerk. Interesting. He hadn't bothered learning what I actually did for a living. He thought captain was just another office title. He mistook discipline for weakness. He mistook silence for fear. He mistook patience for surrender. "Sign it, Cassandra," he whispered, "or we will ruin your uniform." The room fell completely still. I glanced from the pen to the forged complaint, to my father. He never once told Sterling he had gone too far. That silence answered every question I still carried about whether he knew what was happening. He knew. He approved, and he expected me to save them anyway. I rested one hand on the edge of the contract but never touched the pen. Then I looked Sterling straight in the eye. "I'd like 48 hours. His eyebrows lifted. "To think? To read every page carefully." My father relaxed for the first time all afternoon. Sterling leaned back in his chair, convinced he had finally cornered me. Neither man noticed that I had already memorized every name, every signature block, every document number, and every mistake they had made before they ever placed that folder in front of me. I let my hand rest on the edge of the contract, just long enough for them to mistake hesitation for defeat. The silence worked in their favor. Or so they thought. I lowered my eyes to the paperwork and deliberately reread the first page, moving more slowly than necessary. I even blinked a few extra times, as though the words refused to stay in focus. Years of military training had taught me something useful. People usually see exactly what they expect to see. Sterling expected a tired officer. My father expected the obedient daughter, who had spent her life cleaning up everyone else's mess. Neither of them expected someone running an assessment. I rubbed my forehead. "I'm not sleeping well." Sterling leaned back in his chair. "I can imagine. My last deployment," I paused and exhaled. "Coming home hasn't been as easy as I thought." That wasn't entirely a lie. Coming home had been difficult, just not for the reasons they imagined. My father softened his voice by half a degree. "You've been under pressure." I nodded. "I've signed thousands of operational documents over the years. Orders, incident reports, supply authorizations." I looked down at the contract again. "This is different." Sterling exchanged a satisfied glance with Winston. "Good. Let them believe I was overwhelmed." I allowed one hand to tremble slightly while lifting the next page. Not enough to seem theatrical. Just enough for someone eager to believe the story. "I don't think I can process legal language like this today." Sterling folded his arms. "So what are you asking for?" "I need 48 hours. He looked at my father again. Dad shrugged. "To do what?" "To calm down." I laughed quietly at myself. I'm embarrassed to even admit this, but I keep reading the same paragraph over and over. I tapped page 12. It just won't stay in my head. The truth was exactly the opposite. I already remembered every clause, every cross-reference, every page number, every missing witness signature. But I kept my shoulders slumped, my breathing slow, my posture smaller than usual. The performance cost almost nothing. The information it earned would be priceless. Sterling smiled with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. "I suppose that's reasonable." My father nodded. "You've always needed time before making big decisions." That almost made me laugh. No, I'd simply been the only person in the family who actually read what she signed. Sterling pulled the contract back toward himself. "You'll return Friday." "I will. And you'll sign." I hesitated just long enough. "I think so." That answer relaxed both men more than any signature could have. People become careless the moment they stop feeling threatened. Sterling uncapped the gold fountain pen and twirled it between his fingers. "I knew you'd see reason. I just don't want to make another mistake." "You won't." "Not if I can help it," he meant. He recapped the pen and slid it back into his jacket pocket. Interesting. He trusted the contract enough to let me leave. He didn't trust me enough to leave the pen. That tiny decision told me more about him than another hour of conversation. As we stood, my father finally asked the first personal question he'd directed toward me all afternoon. "When do you report back to work?" "Monday." "Still doing computer work?" I looked at him. "Something like that," he smiled. "I never really understood what your job was." I almost answered honestly. Then I remembered who I was talking to. Most people don't. That was true. The less said about secure assignments, the better. We walked toward the study door together. Before opening it, Sterling rested one hand on my shoulder. "You're making the smart choice." His grip lingered longer than necessary. Not comforting, possessive. as though he already considered me another asset on his balance sheet. I stepped away. I'll be back in 48 hours. We'll have everything ready. I'm sure you will. The hallway outside buzzed with wedding preparations. Florists rolled in another cart of white peonies. Someone argued over linen colors. A wedding planner hurried past carrying 3 clipboards and a tablet. Nobody noticed the meeting that had just taken place behind the closed study door. That was probably how my father preferred it. Appearances first. Always. As I crossed the foyer, I heard laughter drifting from the partially open study door behind me. Not loud, just enough. Curiosity made me slow my pace without turning around. Sterling spoke first. I told you she'd fold. Dad chuckled. She always does. What if she gets nervous? She won't. She spent her entire life trying to earn this family's approval. A glass clinked against another. Someone poured a drink. Then my father said something that settled into my memory with perfect clarity. She's disciplined enough to follow orders. The irony almost stopped me in my tracks. He thought discipline meant obedience. He had confused military discipline with personal surrender. Those are very different things. I kept walking. Outside, evening traffic rolled past the estate gates, as though nothing unusual had happened. I unlocked my truck and sat behind the steering wheel without starting the engine. Instead, I took out a small notebook I carried for work. Most people expected encrypted apps. I trusted paper. Paper didn't run out of battery. On a blank page, I wrote 6 names. Winston Prescott, Sterling Sinclair, Southern Petal Signature Events, Commercial Loan Number, Pension Discrepancy, Forged Notary. Then I added one final line underneath. Do not interrupt the operation before the target commits completely. I closed the notebook. Military planning rarely depended on emotion. It depended on timing. Every operation has a moment when acting too early ruins everything. This wasn't the time. Not yet. I drove home instead of calling anyone. No angry messages, no legal threats, no dramatic confrontations, just quiet. Exactly what they expected from the daughter they believed they had finally broken. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone lit up with a text from Sterling. Glad we're on the same page. See you Friday. I read it once, locked the screen, and slipped the phone into my pocket. For the first time since walking into that study, I smiled without pretending. They thought I had asked for 48 hours because I was too exhausted to understand what they had placed in front of me. In reality, I had asked for 48 hours, because that was exactly how long I needed to make sure every door they intended to close around me would instead lock behind them. I walked into my command building before sunrise carrying nothing but a legal pad, a thumb drive, and a decision I had already made. The emergency leave request took less than 10 minutes. Reason: immediate legal matter involving identity fraud and financial exposure. Duration: 72 hours. My company commander glanced at the paperwork, looked at me for a moment, and signed it without asking unnecessary questions. Take care of what you need to take care of, Captain. I will, sir. I thanked him and headed across the installation to another building where very few people ever wandered without a reason. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hayes had been my commanding officer for nearly 3 years. He wasn't the loudest leader I'd ever worked for. He didn't have to be. When Colonel Hayes spoke, people listened because he had earned that privilege long before I met him. His office door was open. He looked up from a stack of reports. Captain Prescott. Sir. You look like someone who's about to ask for something complicated. I am. He motioned toward the chair across from his desk. Start from the beginning. So I did. Not the childhood stories, not the wedding. Just facts. The forged commercial loan, the liability waiver, the fabricated ethics complaint, the pension discrepancies, the transfer records. Every document I had printed, every timeline I had assembled, he never interrupted. He simply organized the pages into neat piles while I spoke. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Have you used government systems for any of this? No, sir. Good. Everything came from public records, private legal copies, or my own financial documentation. Good. He tapped one finger on the loan agreement. This is no longer a family dispute. I know. This is alleged financial fraud involving identity theft, interstate transactions, and potentially federal jurisdiction. Yes, sir. He nodded once. You've handled this correctly. Those 5 words meant more to me than he probably realized. For the first time since coming home, someone had evaluated me instead of judging me. He reached for his desk phone. I'm making one call. Less than 20 minutes later, another man walked into the office carrying a worn leather briefcase. Attorney Clarence DuPont. I'd met him only a handful of times growing up. He had handled my grandfather Garrick's legal affairs for decades. His gray suit looked expensive without trying to advertise it. He shook my hand firmly. Captain Prescott. Mr. DuPont. I've been hoping we'd meet under better circumstances. Colonel Hayes gestured toward the conference table. We'll keep this simple. For the next 2 hours, we rebuilt the timeline from scratch. Every bank transfer, every signature, every corporate filing, every deployment date, every leave record proving where I had actually been. Mr. DuPont asked precise questions. What day did you first discover the forged guarantee? Tuesday. When did Sterling demand your signature? Yesterday. Did you sign anything? No. Did anyone threaten your military career? Directly. Can you repeat his exact words? I did. He wrote them down without changing a single syllable. Good lawyers appreciate exact language. By noon, the conference table had disappeared beneath organized stacks of evidence. Colonel Hayes stood. We're not emailing any of this. No, sir. No cloud storage, no shared drives, no commercial messaging. He looked at both of us. If someone has already forged military-related documents once, we assume they're willing to destroy electronic evidence if they sense exposure. Mr. DuPont nodded. I brought something. He opened his briefcase and removed an encrypted external drive that had never been connected to the internet. Brand new, factory sealed. We build this trail offline. Air-gapped, completely isolated. No wireless connection, no remote access. Every document was scanned, hashed, cataloged, and copied onto the drive, while duplicate paper originals were placed into numbered evidence folders. By late afternoon, Colonel Hayes contacted the appropriate liaison with the Army Criminal Investigation Division. He never exaggerated. He never accused anyone of crimes they hadn't yet been proven to commit. He simply described what existed: potential identity fraud, potential financial crimes, potential misuse of an active duty officer's status. Facts. Only facts. The ID representative requested one thing. Do not interfere if the suspects are still actively attempting to complete the transaction. Mr. DuPont looked at me. They're expecting you Friday. I know. Good. He folded his hands, then let them proceed. I understood immediately. People rarely confess with words. They confess with actions. If Sterling still believed I intended to cooperate, he would continue following the original plan. That mattered. Because one detail in the paperwork had caught my attention the night before. The commercial refinancing package wasn't complete yet. The bank had placed the $2.5 million transaction into a digital holding queue, pending one final executed liability acknowledgement, mine. Without that final document, the wire transfer couldn't be released. With it, Sterling would authorize the money to move. Mr. DuPont pointed to the schedule. The moment he signs the final authorization believing you've accepted liability, he personally commits the transaction. I finished. Exactly. Colonel Hayes smiled slightly. I've always liked officers who finish the briefing. The room relaxed for the first time all day. Even so, nobody celebrated. Experience teaches you that operations fail when people start congratulating themselves too early. Before we adjourned, Colonel Hayes handed me a small folder. Inside sat emergency contact numbers, seed case references, and written guidance on preserving the chain of custody for every document. If anything changes, he said, you call these numbers first. Yes, sir, and Cassandra. He almost never used my first name. Don't try to be the hero. I smiled. I wasn't planning to. Good. Heroes usually make terrible witnesses. Even Mr. DuPont laughed at that. As we packed the evidence, my phone buzzed. Sterling. Everything ready for tomorrow? I stared at the message for a few seconds. Then I typed exactly 8 words. Yes, I'll bring everything you asked me to sign. He responded almost instantly. Excellent. This ends tomorrow. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. He was right about one thing. Something would end tomorrow. Just not the thing he imagined. Because while Sterling spent the evening preparing documents he believed would bury me beneath millions of dollars in fraud, 3 separate evidence packets were already sealed, documented, and moving through entirely different hands. The operation no longer depended on my family's version of the truth. It depended on timestamps, signatures, wire authorizations, and one final decision Sterling still believed he controlled. I buttoned the last brass button on my dress uniform and checked my reflection one final time before leaving the hotel. There wasn't much to adjust. The ribbon sat perfectly level. The bronze star rested above my left pocket. The purple heart caught the light without demanding attention. Combat badges, captain's bars. Everything had been earned one assignment at a time. Nothing on that uniform had been purchased. Nothing had been handed to me because of my last name. That mattered. The Charleston Harbor Yacht Club had hosted politicians, governors, and business leaders for decades. Valets lined the entrance. A jazz trio played beside the fountain. White lights wrapped around the palm trees leading toward the ballroom, where Prescott Shipping and Timber was celebrating its 40th anniversary. A large banner stretched across the entrance. 40 years of family. 40 years of trust. I almost laughed. The valet opened my truck door and paused for a second when he saw the uniform. "Good evening, Captain." "Good evening. Thank you for your service." "Thank you." He said those 5 words more sincerely than my parents had spoken to me in years. Inside, nearly 150 guests filled the ballroom. Investment bankers, port authority officials, maritime consecutives, state representatives. Everyone wore black tuxedos or designer evening gowns. Then I walked in wearing army blue. Conversation slowed. Not because I looked out of place. Because uniforms always attract attention in rooms where appearances matter. Across the ballroom, Madeline stood beneath a crystal chandelier wearing a silver silk gown that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. She held a champagne glass in one hand while greeting guests with practiced perfection. Sterling noticed me first. The smile disappeared from his face almost immediately. He checked his watch. Good. He expected me, just not like this. My mother turned around after following his line of sight. For one brief moment, she simply stared. Then panic replaced surprise. She crossed the ballroom so quickly she nearly bumped into a waiter. "Cassandra, Mom." I looked down at myself. "My uniform. You couldn't wear something appropriate? This is appropriate." "No." She lowered her voice. "This is a corporate celebration, I'm aware. People are dressed for an elegant evening." I followed Army dress regulations. Her jaw tightened. "You know exactly what I mean." Actually, I did. She didn't want me reminding everyone that someone in the Prescott family had chosen service instead of status. Before I could answer, she waved toward 2 private security officers standing near the ballroom entrance. The taller one approached politely. "Good evening, ma'am." Mom answered before I could. "This guest isn't following the evening's presentation standards." The security officer looked confused. He glanced at me, then at my military identification clipped discreetly inside my jacket, then back at my mother. "Ma'am," she interrupted him. "She's ruining the elegant corporate aesthetic of our family celebration." The poor man looked like he wished someone else had been assigned this conversation. He cleared his throat. "Captain, has anyone informed you of a dress code?" I smiled. "No." He looked relieved. "Our invitation simply specifies formal attire." He hesitated. "I believe a United States Army dress uniform qualifies." "I believe so too." He nodded once. "I hope you enjoy your evening." Then he walked away. My mother's expression hardened. "I'll be speaking with club management." "You should. They know this family." "I'm counting on that." She stared at me for another second before leaving without another word. I wandered toward one of the display tables showcasing Prescott Shipping's history. Black and white photographs, model cargo ships, old newspaper headlines, 40 years of success carefully arranged beneath glass. One display caught my attention. A framed quote from my grandfather Garrick. "Integrity outlasts profit." Interesting choice, especially considering who now controlled the company. I wondered how many people in the room actually knew Garrick had written those words. Probably very few. A retired dock supervisor recognized me from years ago. "Cass?" I turned. "Mr. Ellison?" He laughed. "I'll be damned." He shook my hand with both of his. "I remember when you used to sweep sawdust in the warehouse during summer breaks. I remember you teaching me how to back a trailer without hitting the loading dock. You finally made captain." "Yes, sir." He stepped back and looked at my uniform. "Your grandfather would have been proud." The sentence landed differently than he probably intended. "Thank you. I mean that." Before we could continue, the ballroom lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage. My father walked to the podium while the audience applauded. He looked completely at home beneath the lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice filled the room with practiced confidence. "Thank you for celebrating 40 years of Prescott Shipping and Timber." Another round of applause. He spoke about growth, partnerships, expansion, legacy. Every sentence sounded polished enough for an annual report. Then his eyes found me. I watched the exact moment he changed his plan. He smiled, not warmly, deliberately. "As many of you know, tonight is about family." My stomach remained perfectly calm, because this wasn't improvisation anymore. This was confirmation. He wanted a public audience. "Unfortunately," he continued, "every family carries disappointments." The room became noticeably quieter. He stepped away from the podium and spoke without notes. "My eldest daughter returned recently after years away." Several guests looked toward me. "Many of you have already noticed her." More heads turned. "Some sacrifices deserve respect." He paused. "Others become excuses." No one moved. No one interrupted. My father rested both hands on the podium. "I've spent years trying to help someone who refuses help." His voice grew louder. "Someone who blames everyone else for her failures." Madeline lowered her eyes. Sterling remained perfectly still. Mom watched me instead of him. Then my father said the words I knew he would never be able to take back. "I publicly disown Cassandra Prescott." A collective gasp spread through the ballroom. She is an unstable, ungrateful disappointment who has brought shame to our table. Complete silence. No music, no glasses clinking. Even the catering staff froze where they stood. My father looked satisfied. He believed humiliation worked best with witnesses. He expected me to argue, to cry, to defend myself. Instead, I stood perfectly still with both hands relaxed at my sides, exactly as years of military ceremonies had taught me. Sometimes the strongest response isn't speaking first. Sometimes it's giving someone just enough silence to finish destroying themselves before the truth walks through the door. I kept my eyes on my father and waited. He mistook my silence for surrender. "You've embarrassed this family long enough," Winston said, still gripping the microphone. Security. The same two officers from earlier hesitated near the edge of the ballroom. Neither one moved immediately. The taller guard looked uncomfortable. "Sir," I said, "remove her." Before either guard could take another step, the heavy double doors behind the ballroom swung open, so hard they struck the wall with a deep thud that echoed across the room. Every head turned. 4 military police officers entered first. Behind them walked 2 federal financial investigators carrying sealed evidence cases, and directly between them came Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hayes. He wasn't in a hurry. He didn't need to be. His measured pace carried the kind of authority that made people instinctively step aside without being asked. My father smiled, for one brief second. He actually believed they had come for me. I watched the confidence disappear from Sterling's face instead. He recognized the investigators. He knew exactly what they represented. Colonel Hayes walked straight past my father without acknowledging him. Past the podium, past the board members, past every executive who suddenly found the floor fascinating. He stopped exactly 1 arm's length in front of me. His heels came together with a sharp click. His posture locked into perfect military bearing. Then he raised his right hand. A flawless salute. Every movement was crisp, every angle exact, not performed for drama, performed because protocol matters. Because respect matters, I returned the salute. "Good evening, Captain Prescott," he said. "Good evening, sir." His voice carried clearly through the silent ballroom. "I am here in my official capacity to acknowledge your full cooperation in an active federal investigation." No one breathed, not that I could hear. Colonel Hayes lowered his hand and turned toward the room. "I also wish to make one fact unmistakably clear." He looked directly at my father. "Captain Cassandra Prescott serves this country with distinction." Then toward Sterling. "Her professional conduct has been exemplary." Then back toward the audience. "Any attempt to question her honor should first survive the evidence." My father finally found his voice. "What is the meaning of this?" One of the federal investigators answered before Colonel Hayes could. "Mr. Prescott, we'll have questions for you shortly." Sterling took one careful step backward. Very small, barely noticeable, but I noticed. People planning to run rarely sprint first. They measure exits. Attorney Clarence DuPont entered through the same doors carrying 2 evidence binders and a compact equipment case. He nodded once in my direction. No smile, no celebration, just business. He walked directly to the ballroom's audiovisual control cabinet near the stage. The club's event coordinator hurried over. "You can't touch that." Mr. DuPont calmly handed him a federal authorization letter. 30 seconds later, the coordinator stepped aside. The ballroom's giant projection screens went black. Then a title appeared. "Forensic Financial Record." A quiet murmur spread across the audience. Mr. DuPont spoke without raising his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, these records are certified copies obtained through lawful forensic review." The first spreadsheet appeared. Employee pension distributions. Quarterly reconciliation reports. Highlighted transfers. Every unexplained discrepancy glowed bright yellow. Mr. DuPont pressed a remote. A total appeared at the bottom. 2,203,487 misappropriated employee pension assets. The ballroom erupted. "What? That's impossible." 2 million? One elderly man removed his glasses just to look again. Sterling finally spoke. "Those numbers are incomplete." Mr. DuPont clicked the remote again. They're accompanied by bank confirmations. The screen split into multiple panels. Wire transfers, corporate accounts, holding companies, timestamps. Every movement documented. Every dollar traceable. Sterling's signature appeared over and over. His attorney, wherever he happened to be, was probably having a very bad evening. The next image filled the screen. The commercial loan package. Page after page. My forged signature enlarged until everyone could see it. Then another slide. Verified military travel orders. Deployment location, date, times, distance from Charleston, nearly 7,000 miles away. Mr. DuPont looked toward the audience. Captain Prescott was outside the United States on the date these notarized signatures were allegedly witnessed. Another click. The forged notary certificate appeared beside an authenticated specimen. Red circles highlighted every inconsistency: license expiration, seal placement, registration number. Even the notary stamp had been copied incorrectly. The federal investigator beside the stage quietly said, "That alone carries separate criminal exposure." Sterling stopped pretending. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," Mr. DuPont answered. "It's a timeline." My father grabbed the microphone again. "My daughter manipulated these records." Colonel Hayes looked at him with complete disbelief. "Captain Prescott never had access to your corporate accounting systems." Mr. DuPont nodded. "Nor would she need to." Another document appeared: my monthly wire transfers, every confirmation number, every notation. For Grandpa Garrick's cardiac treatment, month after month, year after year, 5 years, half of my hazardous duty pay. The ballroom grew quiet again. Someone whispered, "She was sending money home?" Another answered softly, "The whole time." Mr. DuPont opened the second evidence binder. "I have one final document." Even I hadn't seen this version before. He carefully removed a sealed envelope bearing my grandfather's legal seal. Garrick Prescott executed a certified codicil to his will 6 months before his passings. He broke the seal. The ballroom remained absolutely silent. Then he began reading. "Because my eldest granddaughter chose to protect lives in silence, while my family measured my worth in dollar signs." My throat tightened despite myself. "I name Captain Cassandra Prescott the sole executor and primary heir of my entire $15 million estate." Across the room, my mother's hand flew to her mouth. Madeline's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered across the marble floor. Mr. DuPont continued, "Leaving my greedy family completely disinherited." No one reacted immediately. Some truths arrived too large to understand all at once. Then every conversation in the ballroom exploded at the same time. Board members stared at Winston. Investors backed away from Sterling. 2 longtime shipping contractors quietly removed their company badges from their jackets, as though they suddenly wanted no connection to the Prescott name. My father looked at me as if he'd never seen me before. Not because I'd become someone different. Because, for the first time in his life, every dollar he believed he controlled had stopped obeying him. And standing just beyond the stage, I noticed the federal investigators exchange one brief nod with the military police. The evidence phase was over. The arrest phase was about to begin. I watched the investigators exchange one final nod, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The lead federal agent stepped onto the stage, carrying a folder no thicker than an inch. He didn't raise his voice. "Sterling St. Sinclair." Sterling didn't answer. "You're being detained pending investigation into financial fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and related federal offenses." Another agent approached my father, Winston Prescott. My father pointed toward me. "This is absurd. She's manipulating all of you." The agent didn't even look in my direction. "Please place your hands behind your back. I am the CEO of this company. You are also the subject of an active investigation." For the first time in my life, my father sounded uncertain. "There has to be some mistake." The only reply came from the unmistakable click of steel handcuffs locking around his wrists. A second later, the same sound echoed again as Sterling was restrained. The ballroom had gone completely silent except for camera shutters. Several guests had already pulled out their phones. The same social circles that had spent years praising my family's reputation were now recording its collapse from every angle. Sterling looked at me over one officer's shoulder. "This isn't over," I answered calmly. "No, it isn't, because investigations don't end with an arrest. They begin there." My mother suddenly pushed through the crowd. "Cassandra," she grabbed my sleeve before I could step away. "Please." It was the first time I'd heard that word from her in years. "You have to stop this." "I can't. You can tell them it was a misunderstanding." "It wasn't." Madeline hurried over next, mascara running down her face. Her expensive silver gown dragged across broken glass and spilled champagne. "Cass, please." She reached for my hands. I didn't pull away. I simply didn't take hers. "We'll lose everything." I looked at her quietly. "You already did." "No, we can fix this." She was crying so hard she struggled to finish sentences. "Please withdraw whatever you filed. I didn't file lies." "You know what I mean. Our friends, our investors, our reputation." She never once said our father had stolen. She never once said Sterling had forged documents. She never once asked how I had survived 5 years overseas. Even now, she was trying to rescue appearances before people. The realization didn't hurt anymore. It simply confirmed what I already knew. My mother slowly sank to her knees. Guests instinctively stepped backward to give her space. "Cassandra? We're still your family." I looked at both of them for a long moment. Then I answered with the truth neither of them had ever wanted. "Family isn't a word you remember only when you need something." Neither of them spoke again. I adjusted the cuff of my dress uniform, turned around, and walked straight through the center of the ballroom. Nobody tried to stop me. The marble floor near the entrance still carried faint traces of mud from outside where guests had been arriving. My polished army shoes picked up just enough dirt to leave visible footprints across the cream-colored carpet. My mother had insisted be imported from Italy for the gala. I noticed them. So did she. Years earlier, she had worried about mud on my boots. Tonight, she watched every footprint without saying a word. Outside, the harbor air felt cleaner than anything inside that ballroom. I loaded my garment bag into the truck, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. Some roads don't deserve a second glance. The criminal cases stretched on for months. Evidence took time, trials took longer. Sterling eventually accepted a plea agreement after forensic accountants traced the pension transfers through multiple shell companies. Several former employees finally recovered portions of the retirement funds they thought were gone forever. My father's company never celebrated another anniversary. Prescott Shipping and Timber was dissolved after the courts approved its restructuring. Attorney Clarence DuPont carried out my grandfather's final wishes exactly as written. Not $1 of the estate arrived because of sympathy. It arrived because one man had documented the truth before he died. I used part of the inheritance to establish the Garrick Prescott Veterans Housing Trust. The first property closed at $2,846,900. 23 service members and their families moved into affordable homes during the first year. That investment accomplished more than another yacht or ballroom ever could. The rest of my life became surprisingly ordinary, which, after everything that happened, felt like a gift. I stayed in uniform. I kept showing up for work. I still preferred black coffee. Rangers still barked at every delivery truck that passed my house. Peace doesn't usually arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives through routine. Several years later, I left the base after a long day of meetings. A steady rain had soaked the parking lot. As I crossed toward my truck, someone called my name, Cass. I turned. For a second, I didn't recognize her. Madeline looked older than her years. Her designer handbags were gone. She wore a store-issued blue polo beneath a thin rain jacket, with the name of a discount home goods retailer stitched over the pocket. She clutched a paper grocery bag that had begun falling apart in the rain. I work across the street now, she said quietly. I see. She nodded toward the base entrance. I waited because I wanted to talk. Rainwater dripped from her hair. She looked exhausted, not glamorous, just tired. I've been trying to understand. I waited. She swallowed hard. When everything fell apart, another pause. Why did you deny me a cent? She looked directly at me. Why didn't you save us? Traffic moved behind us. Neither of us noticed. I thought about every birthday that passed without a phone call, every wire transfer, every forged signature, every conversation where my worth had been measured against a balance sheet. Then I answered. Because respect that arrives only after you find out I hold the checkbook is not respect at all. She lowered her eyes. I didn't destroy your life, Madeline. I spoke as calmly as I ever had. I simply stopped paying for your lies. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. For the first time since we were children, she simply listened. I wished her well, and I meant it. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. I had forgiven the anger years earlier because carrying it into every new morning would only have given it more years to steal from me. But forgiveness doesn't require reopening the door to people who repeatedly chose to walk over your dignity. As I drove home, I realized my grandfather had been right all those years ago. Character really is what remains after the applause leaves the room. Money can buy invitations, headlines, and impressive speeches, but it cannot purchase integrity. Titles fade. Companies rise and fall. Public opinion changes with the next news cycle. The way you treat people when they have nothing to offer you, that is the part they remember for the rest of their lives. And if someone asks you to trade your dignity for their comfort, the most valuable thing you can say is no. Before you leave, take a look at the story waiting for you on your screen. It's one of the most unforgettable family betrayals we've ever shared on this channel, and the ending changes everything you think you know. Once you watch it, you'll understand why so many viewers keep coming back to it.